Oops, I just did something. There we go. All right, so today I want to focus on like in the physical practice, everybody needs a strap. So I hope you have a strap. Um, this is some of the good things that I learned from Donna Fari in our workshop last week. And it's something that, of course, we all know, but and I'm going to teach you just a subtle little unique way of doing some poses that we do regularly. So when you think about the pelvis, and here's your spine, comes down your sacrum, this broad bone at the bottom of your pelvis, and then your pelvis wraps around. So I'll show you on my body, like your sacrum's right here, right? And then you have the ilium, the two halves of your pelvis, um, come and attach to your sacrum at your sacroiliac joint or your SI joint or your SIJ. There's lots of ways to kind of acronym that joint. But remember that the SI joint is a very stable joint. This is not, if you think about like your shoulder joint or your hip joint where there's a ball and a socket, and there's all this slide and glide. I always think of it like freshly zambonied ice, on an ice rink. All this slide and glide. And that increases our range of motion. We have so much range of motion, especially in our shoulders, but in our hips also. They're very stable joints, but they're also very mobile joints. The joint architecture lends itself to this kind of mobility, whereas the SI joint, the sacroiliac joint, does not lend itself to a lot of mobility. It lends itself to a lot of stability. So when you look at that joint anatomically, the articulating surfaces where the two bones meet, that surface is like Velcro. It's like bumpy and cratery and filled with a lot of texture so that when the two surfaces meet, there's not a lot of slide and glide and shifting and moving, that it's a fairly stable joint that you want there. It is mobile, but you don't want a lot of mobility in this joint. And there's fortress of ligaments, that anterior, posterior, lots of ligaments that hug that joint to help keep it stable. So we have the range of motion that allows us to walk and run and squat and do all the things that are natural movements in our body, but it shouldn't be something that just gets like pried open. And a lot of times when we have reached the end of our range of motion in our hip joint and we ask it to go further than the body naturally can, if the hip joint, so the hip is connected to the pelvis. Here's the pelvis, here's the femur bone, hip joint. The other side of this pelvic bone is the SI joint. And so if the hip joint is yanking on that ilium, then well, it's actually the ischium, but that part, that pelvis is going to move and it's going to pull on the SI joint. So when we overdo hip range of motion and force the hip to do what it's not ready to do, whether because we have just inherent lack of mobility in there, or there's muscle tension that's preventing range of motion, or we're injured, or whatever it is, whatever our structural anatomy allows at that moment, the SI joint will pry open a little bit because the pelvis is going to go with the hip. And so part of keeping the SI joint healthy is not overdoing ranges of motion in the hip joint. And we do a lot of this in yoga, like the holy grail of these poses often lends itself to hip openers. We want to keep our hips open. We want to keep our hips flexible. And that's all very true, but we don't want to do it at the expense of our SI joint stability. So be mindful whenever you're doing hip poses, whether they're standing poses, like where you're rotating and abducting and at the same time, or whether you're in deep extension of the hip or deep rotation of the hip, you want to be very mindful to only go where your body really can stabilize and go. And how do you know? It's like, how do you know? I mean, you will feel end point range. When you're in a joint movement, you'll have feedback from the joint itself. You'll have sensation in the joint itself. You'll have sensation in the muscles that this is just the end of my range. And how do we respect this? So part of it is moving slower, this sense of interoception, really knowing the feeling state of end range of motion so we don't push ourselves over the edge. So we want to touch the edge, but we don't want to push over the edges. And a lot of times when we're doing poses like pigeon pose, for instance, when we are in a rotation of the hip joint, a flexion of the hip joint, and a little abduction of the hip joint. So abduction is going away from the midline. Flexion is, the bringing our knee to our chest and then rotating. So when we do a pigeon pose, we're doing all of that. We're flexing, we're rotating, and we're abducting a little bit. We have like all of those things going on at one time. On top of that, where gravity is pressing down on that joint. So that's a lot of pressure on the joint. So unless you really know where your stability lies, it's better to do that on your back. It's better take the gravity away, take the depth of it away, do something so that you know you're keeping safe. So what we're going to focus on today is really trying to sense the joint, sense the SI joint, so that we know when we move into abduction or rotation or extension or flexion, that we really understand and feel, oh, this is the end of what my hip can offer, so that I can feel my SI joint and what it's doing in relationship to the hip. So the type of practice we're going to do today is pelvic stability, and that means not letting the pelvis go offline from each other more than it needs to. So we're going to focus a lot on, are my hips even? Is my pelvis square? Am I able to maintain the space, or am I doing some weird, counter thing with my pelvis to try to increase my range of motion that isn't naturally there? Okay. So I could talk a lot about this. There's much to do in this place. And I will keep talking about it, but that's it for today. Okay. All right. So let's close your eyes and take a moment. Even sitting, how are you sitting right here in this place? Are you up on something? Are you sitting flat on the floor? Do you have the right support underneath you? And how do you know? Is your spine able to open up, or are you rolling back onto the tail? Do you have a sense that there's not a fighting in your body to stay upright? Are you self-sustaining? Are your hips and knees in line with each other, or your knees lower than your hips? So if your knees are higher than your hips, then I would suggest getting higher up under your pelvis so that there's a little more ease across those hip joints. And you're probably sitting, if you're sitting cross-legged, in the cross that you always do. So let's experiment and cross your legs, just flip them, cross your legs the other way, and just see what it feels like to sense your hip joints in kind of the novelty of a different position. So as you kind of tune your awareness in, pay attention to what it feels like to be in your body right now. Give yourself an opportunity to not just feel what the pelvis and hips are doing, but the breath and the wholeness of you. Is there anything that you need to help you ground or be present or fully embody? As you check in with yourself, is there any part of you that's absent or a little stuck, or maybe your breath needs a little attention? Just kind of follow the signs within yourself. And then as you kind of return your awareness back into the pelvis and the hip joints, notice what's here. See what it feels like to kind of dive into the sensation of the hip joints, the sensation of the SI joints. And we'll do, some of this awareness work once we are out of this position, but just notice what's here. Are you centered on your sit bones? Your sit bones are part of your pelvic bones. So you have, the broad big bones on the top, and then they narrow down lower and come to two kind of rounded points at the bottom of your pelvis. These are your sit bones or your ischial tuberosities. Are you even weighted there? Are the curves in your low back intact, or do you feel a rounding or an overarching? Is one hip higher or lower? Is one hip more forward or back? Do you have any discomfort? Is your breath able to move into your pelvis? Is your pelvic floor able to move with the breath? So many things to explore. And bring your hands to your heart. Offer an intention here. And then release the hands. And we'll find our way onto our back. So as you stretch out and lengthen your body, remember we need a strap. So let's pause here for a moment and just let's do our morning stretch here. Reach your arms and legs and just enjoy a little like welcoming home onto your mat. Doesn't it feel good to be on your mat? Feel the texture of your mat and the joy of just the simple practices of embodiment. Okay. Let's go ahead and roll around in your wrists and roll around in your ankles. All right, and then drive your knees into your chest and rock a little bit, swaying from side to side. All right, and then hang on to the knees and let's circle. Now, as we start to have these circles, try to make the circle small so you can really feel like you're circling on your sacrum. And if you're, again, if you're unfamiliar, the sacrum is that bone in the very bottom of your vertebrae. Your sacrum is kind of like fused vertebrae, basically, and it's that triangular shaped bone that connects to your pelvis. So sense it just even in the simple movement. Circle the other way, small little circles. So you can really feel that the weight is moving through into your sacrum, that you can sense this part of your body. Back body is hard to feel sometimes. We can't see it, touch it, it's not as available to us as the front. Okay. And then when you're ready, open your knees up and bring them back. And without pushing into and pulling, without prodding your hip joints, just let a natural circle happen and pay attention to the sweep of that circling of your hips. And where is this range that's just kind of natural without you pulling on your knees to deepen? Where is the natural, comfortable range of motion in your hip joints? Do they feel the same? Do they feel different? Do you have one hip that's different than the other? So just pay attention to sensations. Do you have any pain? Do you have any clicks, pops, snaps? Is it markedly different or quite similar? And then put your feet down onto the ground and see if you can just sense here. Maybe put your hands low on your pelvis. Feel your hip bones, the front of your pelvis, those bony parts. See if you can just kind of get some awareness of the architecture of your pelvis. Maybe walk your hands and feel your way to your pubic bone, also part of your pelvis, your pubic symphysis. This is where the two halves of your pelvis join at a joint, kind of a joint. And then walk back to those ASIS, the front parts, bony parts of your hip bones and the front of your hips. And then lift up your pelvis a little bit and put your hands comfortably. So that could be different things for different people. Maybe palms down on the ground and just put your hands underneath your sacrum. I have a little triangle shape forming between my fingers, between my index fingers and between my thumbs. So there's like a little triangle gap for my my sacrum to kind of hang out on, like a little perch, like a little, I don't know, like a stand for your sacrum. And then just see what it feels like to rock a little bit there, where maybe you come forward into a posterior tilt and back into an anterior tilt, maybe tip a little bit to one side and tip a little to the other side, and just kind of feel your way into that sacrum. And then walk your hands a little further away from each other, just a little bit. So maybe you're now outlining the outside edge of that SI joint, where you can kind of feel where the joint is. Move around, rock your knees, move your pelvis, roll, tip, compress, lift, do anything that just kind of gives you a little sensing of your bones. Okay. All right, and then relax and rest down, feet on the floor. Let's slide into either, some windshield wipers with your knees, or if you don't want to go that far, you can slide the knee on the inner shin, that cicada wing rub that I talked about last week. So just a little bit of movement of internal and external rotation of the hip joint. Don't let your body go too extreme here. Just like we were making some natural circles with the hip joint, now we're just kind of going into our natural range of motion where you just kind of sense, oh, this is a comfortable range. So nothing's too extreme. I'm not touching the edge or moving off my edge. All right, and then relax your pelvis back down and start to feel. Do you feel neutral in your pelvis? Do you feel it just in this embodiment without adjusting anything? Do you feel like one hip is raised higher toward your shoulders than the other? Do you feel a little more weight bearing into one half of the pelvis than the other? Is there, a little extra weight on one side? Can you notice if you have any of that pelvic distortion going on? Okay. And then bring both knees into the chest and just feel your way into some flexion here. Maybe a little rocking so you just get nice and comfy. And then draw the knees in and just notice what hip flexion feels like with bilateral movements where the hips are doing the same thing. All right, so just notice the hip joints. And then we'll extend our legs, extend your arms and stretch. And this is some extension in the hip joint. It's pretty neutral. We're not reaching our legs behind us yet, but just to feel what that openness of the hips feel like. So expand and then exhale and draw your knees in. Put your feet on the ground, legs together, touch your feet, and then slowly drag your feet apart from each other. And just see where the natural range of motion of abduction, so this is when we pull our legs away from each other, we're abducting the legs. And just notice where the natural range is there. Try to just pay attention to your body's cue that enough is enough, that that's a comfortable place where for you to be. And notice there, do you have evenness or not? Do you have discomfort on one side or not? Like what's happening in the hip joints when you abduct? Has one hip hiked up toward your shoulder? Has one side of the pelvis lifted higher off the floor? What's your sensing? And try not to read too much into what you're feeling. You don't have to analyze what's wrong. Just analyze what is. Okay? See if you can just pay attention to what your body's doing. And then bring the legs back to center, knees into the chest. One more time, a little rocking. All right, and then we'll go ahead and roll over onto your side and come up to your hands and your knees. We'll do a little hip extension in a little bit, but first let's start to move our spine. Start with the pelvis, lifting the tail, let that ripple through your vertebrae, let the vertebrae below support the vertebrae above. So we're not kinking anywhere in our back as we arch, and we're not kinking anywhere in our back as we round. Take your time moving through this, and also notice, what's happening in your pelvis in relation to your vertebrae. Is your tailbone and your pelvis moving in the same direction at the same speed? The movement of anterior tilting the pelvis, this is called nutation of the sacrum. And then when you round the spine and you draw the pelvis into a posterior tilt, this is called counter nutation of the sacrum. Think of it like nodding. That's actually the Latin origin of the word nutate. It's to nod forward and backwards. So think of like your head nodding, your tail, your sacrum is nodding. And nutation is the anterior tilt. Counter nutation is the posterior tilt. All right, and then now that you've warmed up your spine a little bit, just do whatever you want. Think less and feel more. There's no right or wrong way to move. What instinctually does your body want to do? And just follow what that is. Notice patterns. Where do you like to move? Where do you shy away from movement? Is there something releasing? Is there something comfortable? Is there something that you notice that's a little off? Just pay attention. And then drop down into a child's pose and walk the hands far out in front of you. And just notice this very deep flexion in the hips. Is it comfortable? Can you get your sit bones down toward your heels? Are you a little elevated? And is that elevation because of the knee joints or the hip joints that prevents you from going all the way into the flexion of your hips? So just pay attention here and take a breath and travel it down your body all the way to your sacrum. See if you can feel the floating, the mobility, the subtlety of mobility of those SI joints just by breathing and moving the pelvic floor. Some of your pelvic floor muscles attach to your tailbone. Some of them attach to your sacrum. Your tailbone is the very bottom tip of your sacrum. So just notice how when your pelvic floor breathes, your sacrum moves. And then come back up onto all fours. Move around a little bit, wag your tail again, and then we'll lift up into a dog pose. And just pay attention, take a little time, pedal your feet, opening up the full legs now, feeling any kind of movement that helps you warm and loosen and get a sensing of your body. And once you're ready to find a teeny bit of stillness here, see what it feels like to lift your sit bones evenly on both sides. Do they do that in the same way? Does one side of your pelvis lift higher than the other? Are you able to move your femur bones back toward the wall behind you? And do they do that evenly or no? Does one hip move back faster, farther than the other? Notice your pelvic floor breathing here. Notice the movement of your sacrum. All right, and then we'll walk our feet forward, come to Uttanasana. Which foot do you like to weight bear in more? Pay attention because these patterns travel all the way up into our pelvis. Grab onto some blocks if you'd like, a halfway lift, extending through the spine, femur bones up and back. Notice the pelvis. Is it even? Do you have one hip that hikes toward your shoulder or toward the sky? What's happening? Notice the breath again. Notice how the pelvic floor breathes and the sacrum moves. And then release and fold. Push through your feet, rising up, bringing the arms upward to the sky. Let's open up through our chest, expand. Maybe you want to cactus your arms. So much of the practice today is focusing on the sacrum and pelvis. Let's enjoy this wholeness for a moment. Spread your wings open, your chest, squeeze your back if you'd like, and then bring your hands back to center. Pause here for a moment. Notice you're standing. Are you even-footed, even-weighted? All this translates up into your hips. Inhale, arms to the sky. Exhale, floating forward. A halfway lift. Notice where if you kind of fall into some weight, which side you fall into weight a little bit more readily. One more time, a halfway lift, sit bones high, spread your feet, exhale, and release. Back to a dog, feel that extension and balance across the pelvis. Enjoy opening up through your legs. Inhale, forward into a plank. Ground yourself, stretch through your heels, push evenly through your hands. Notice even here if one hip likes to drop toward the ground a little bit more than the other. And find the ground. Roll the shoulders a few times so that you're nice and loose there. Inhale for a cobra pose, low, don't go too high. Exhale and lower back down. What's happening in your sacrum when you do these back bends? Reach your elbows back, lift on up, breathe, and then exhale and lower back down. Come up onto your hands and your knees, move around in your spine, and let's take our right foot forward to a lunge. Lift your back knee up off the ground. So here we are in our asymmetry now. Okay, so notice, how does the extension of your back leg feel? Is it comfortable? Do you feel like you're compensating in any way? And then as we begin to bend and straighten the front knee, pay attention to any thing that takes you offline from the balance in your pelvis. Even though our legs are going into some pretty deep flexion of the front leg and some pretty deep extension of the back leg, can you feel that your pelvis is able to maintain stability through those more full movements? Okay. All right, ground yourself. Feel the roots lie down into your sacrum. See if you can sense, don't lie down, I don't know why I just said that, but sense into that feeling of balance across your sacrum while you're leaned forward here. Push through your feet, rise up. As you go into some deeper extension of that back leg, try bending the back knee a little bit so that it's easier to stabilize the pelvis in neutral. Okay? And then as you start to extend that back leg more and more, notice what it's doing to the SI joint on that same side. Okay? Is there any compression going on? See if you can feel that sense of balance and stability. Where does the stability come from? Feel it in your core. Feel it in the grounding of your feet. Let's rise up with our arms. Straighten the leg only to the place where your pelvis feels like it stays neutral and you're not compressing anywhere across your sacrum. Find your breath. And then we'll bring our hands down, back foot comes forward. Feel that symmetry again. Another good thing that's nice for the sacrum is when you go into postures that are asymmetrical, which we often do, to kind of balance that with some symmetry. A halfway lift, and then step back to the other leg. Left foot's in front, grounding here. Hands on blocks so that your spine has a lot of space. And we'll just notice, what's that extension feeling like in this leg? What's the flexion of the front leg feeling like in the hip joints? Okay. And when you're ready, bend and straighten. And, of course, we always are noticing the sensation of our muscles stretching. So see if you can pay attention to what the joints are feeling, the hip joints and the SI joints, not just kind of the big sensation of the muscular stretch. How's your breath? All right, and then when you feel ready, ground yourself again, push through your feet, come on up, rise up to crescent lunge. Arms coming up to the sky right away, or maybe you want to take a little time and keep your hands on your hips so you can notice your pelvis a little bit more. Bend your back knee a little bit so that you sense, oh yeah, this tips my pelvis this way, this tips my pelvis that way. Like, notice the relationship of the extension of the hip joint and the movement of the pelvis. So as you start to straighten that leg a little bit, don't feel like you have to straighten it all the way. Of course you can, but just see if you're feeling that coming from the groundedness of your front foot, the stability of your core, lifting out of your pelvis. Bring your arms whenever you're ready up in the air. Okay. How do both sides of your SI joints feel here? Are you self-sustaining with the pressure into the ground with your feet, strong legs, engaging your core to support so we're not, relax your core for a moment, fall in your belly, and just notice what happened. Did your hips go offline? Did your SI joint get compressed at all? Connect these things. Okay. Bring your hands back down onto the ground and step back to a dog pose. Find your breath. Come forward into a plank. And we'll lower our knees down, find the ground. Symmetry. Take your legs wider, toes to the edges of your mat. Lift just your legs and feel all the strength. Your glutes can really hug on to your sacrum and stabilize. All right, and then relax. Then we'll come onto our back. Okay, so grab your strap. All right, so Supta Padangusthasana, 1, 2, and 3. We do this pose a lot. It's a wonderful posture to stretch a lot of things in the back of our body and get some good range of motion. We're going to do it a little bit differently today. So take the strap and put it around your right foot, but keep your left knee bent so your foot's on the ground. So a lot of times I'll say you can either have your foot bent or knee bent or your knee straight. But for today, let's keep the knee bent with your foot on the ground and just notice across your sacrum this sense of harmony, balance. And allow that stretch to happen. So we're lifting up into the foot in the strap and we're rooting down into the earth. Lengthening the spine, soft shoulders. Notice the whole back line, glutes stretching, hamstrings all the way to your heel. Even the back body is lengthening. Now pay attention to the balance across your sacrum and pelvis. Are your hips square and even? And then straighten the leg and just notice what happens. It's a lot more for your sacrum to hold this posture, and it probably hasn't changed the stretch through your hamstring all that much. So now you're in a little teeny bit of a tug of war with your pelvis, and then return, put your foot on the ground, and notice if there's just a little more capacity to take the strain off the SI joints, but maintain the stretch through the back line of the body. Same with bringing our leg out to the side. This was new to me. I know that I've taught it a lot to you before, where we open the right leg out to the right and perhaps let the left knee fall out to the side so you're kind of cantilevered in your weight across your sacrum. But for today, bring your right leg back up. Strap is in the right hand. Bring your left knee up in the air. Foot is off the ground. So your knees are the same, they're parallel to each other. And then when you come into this pose, open your right leg out to the right and bring your left knee up toward your chest and out to the side a little bit. So there's just a little bit more symmetry and balance across the pelvis. Now, I feel just as much stretch in my inner right leg, where I'm getting that range of motion of abduction, but I'm balancing it with symmetry of my pelvis on the other side. Instead of, everybody try this now, straighten your left leg on the ground, straight and long, and notice the effort that's required to keep the stability of your sacrum alive and intact. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying notice what happens in the sacrum and in the low back when you do it this way versus when you pick up your knee, bring it toward your chest and out to the side. Is it easier to maintain that stability and balance across your sacrum without strain? Okay. Now lift that leg straight up. Put your left foot on the ground again. And right foot is still on the strap, but we're going to take the strap into the left hand. And as we cross the right leg over to the left, cross the left knee over to the right. So our right thigh is over our left thigh, but we're crossing both knees past the midline. So there's kind of a crisscross symmetry across the pelvis. So we're no longer trying to lift our right hip up and drop the right foot way over to the left. See if you can keep the sacrum on the ground nice and balanced, and stretch through the leg, lengthening the spine. The internal rotation is happening on both legs. This is a nice, safe place for your sacrum to enjoy some internal rotation without prying open that SI joint too much. All right, and then let's try the deeper version. Left leg straight on the floor, cross the right leg over. There's nothing wrong with this. This is a good pose as long as you're staying within your range. But just notice the difference. So if you're having any SI joint instability or low back pain or trouble with really kind of figuring out, is my pelvis stable enough for these deep these deep motions, maybe having your pelvis flat on the ground and letting both legs internally rotate is a better option for you for right now. Okay, and then we'll relax that. Put 2 feet on the ground. Notice the return to symmetry before we do the second side. These are subtle things, and one is not better than the other. What I'm really trying to encourage you is to notice your body and what's working for you today, which might not be what happens any other day. I know that, last week my low back was hurting, and doing it this way, this new way of this kind of balanced sacrum, was so helpful. But then other days I can go much deeper. Maybe you're the same. Maybe you have different things on different days. Let's put our left foot into the strap. Reach the foot up in the air. Drop the femur bone down into the ground. Enjoy the spine lengthening. Enjoy ease in your shoulders and head. Lots of weight bearing. So there's just this sense of that you're not yanking up through your shoulders and neck. And our right foot is bent. Our right knee is bent. Our right foot is on the floor. Notice your SI joints. Notice your pelvis, your hips. Are you even? Does one hike up toward the sky or shoulder? And then experiment. Straighten the right leg and notice if you can comfortably do this without any feeling of change across the SI joints. And for some people, yes, this is very accessible. For other people, thank goodness you can bend your knee to keep your sacrum nice and safe. Okay. You might notice that one side is easier to do this deeper pose than the other. So just pay attention to what's happening in your body. Get to know what those SI joints are doing. All right, let's open up. We'll start with the strap in the left hand. Open up your left leg. Bring your right knee toward your chest and open your right knee out to the side. So kind of like, not quite like a happy baby, but our foot is off the ground. Our right foot is off. Both of our feet are off the ground. And just see if you can sense a evenness, a balance across your sacrum as you do this. How's your breath? And then maybe experiment with straightening that right leg on the ground and see what the differences are. What feels better to your body? Is there any strain with straightening that leg where it's different than muscular effort? Strain in joints is different than muscular effort. And then we'll bring that left leg straight back up. Take the strap into the right hand. Put your right foot on the ground. And as we cross left leg over to right, we're going to cross right knee over to left. So our left thigh's over our right thigh. We're crisscrossing, but we're having that internal rotation on both sides with our sacrum broad on the ground.
We're not lifting and twisting through our pelvis, but maintaining that nice, steady, stable place. Long spine, stretch through your foot in the air. And then if you'd like, straighten that right leg so you can notice what the pose feels like without that right leg counter posing the left. Can you feel that stability across your sacrum? Okay, and then release that and lower your leg down onto the ground. 2 feet on the ground, just notice a moment of symmetry. Okay. Let's lift our pelvis up to a bridge. Okay, climb up onto the tops of your shoulders and just notice, is there even effort? Is there even weight bearing in your feet? Do your feet point the same direction, or is one foot turned in or out? What's happening? Is your hips one higher than the other? Do you have any sensing of asymmetry within this very symmetrical pose? And then relax and come back down. Relax into that symmetry. And then we'll roll to our side and come up to stand. Now, as you come into some wide legs, let's just take a moment. Your legs are nice and open from what we've done. So a deep squat. Notice if you immediately go weight bearing into one side or the other. How do your hips feel when you squat like this? Is flexion along with the abduction comfortable, or is it a lot for you to manage? Okay, come back up to stand. Find your breath, and we'll turn our right foot out. Now, I know I've said this many times before, but when we come into a pose like Virabhadrasana 2, if our back hip is trying so hard to open up to face our pelvis toward the long edge of our mat, this is that pulling that the hip joint can pull the sacrum a little bit out of its, kind of pried open. So we don't want that. So when you come into a pose that's abducted, our legs are wide apart, this front leg is externally rotated and flexed because there's a lot going on in that joint. And we want to protect the hips here, or the sacrum here. So let the back hip turn a little bit toward the front knee so you no longer feel that pulling across the pelvis. Come into the posture, ground yourself, and then open to whatever place you can without feeling like you're going past the end range of your hip joint motion. Okay? So the femur bone, the back thigh, can draw back in the joint without having to pry the hip open. So let the hip be nice and stable, femur bone back, not opening up the hip too much. Just be where it's comfortable for you. And then keeping that same motion in the hip joints, stretch your arm into Parsva Konasana. So there's a lot of extension in the back leg now, and we can extend here without trying to open our pelvis up to the long edge of our mat. Go where is neutral for your pelvis. You want to move as little as necessary, but as much as is needed for your pelvis to stay stable in this position. So we don't want to turn our hips all the way to our front leg. We want to try to open them up. That's the whole purpose of this pose, but we want to do as, we don't want to overstrain. Okay. Breathing here, root into both feet. Feel that full extension. Are your SI joints feeling steady? All right, and then we'll come back up and we'll turn our feet the other way. Our two sides can be very different. So remember, we're abducting our legs, we're flexing into this front leg, and we're rotating. It's a lot for the hip joint, so let's protect. Don't let this back hip feel like it has to, really, really open up. Let it be in a neutral place where you feel a stretch, but it's not an overstretch. Start to get to know those sensations in your body. Breathing deeply, ground through your legs, soften your shoulders. Let the hip move as much as necessary and as little as it needs to turn toward the front leg. Opening up as much as you can without strain. Joint strength or muscle strength, good feeling, good efforting to feel the muscles have to engage. Joint opening, be very, very careful. We go to our range, to the end of our range, and not past. That range will naturally extend itself and get broader as we practice. Elbow on your knee, stretch your arm overhead, Parsvottanasana. So stability and ease and breath come first. Depth of a joint naturally takes its course. You don't have to focus on, I want to go deeper. Focus on, I want to feel spacious, stable, free, and breathing. You want your joints to not be red flags. All right, and then come back up. And let's heel toe our feet in. Come back to neutral and just stand in Tadasana. And you should feel like your hips just did something, that you just kind of put them through their paces, that you weren't just in total neutral territory, you stretched to your edges, but you shouldn't have anything like, ooh, that was a little much. Okay. Inhale, arms up to the sky. Exhale, let's float forward. A halfway lift, extending through the spine. Exhale and release. Step down onto all fours. And let's take our right leg straight back behind you and the left hand out in front of you. Now, we're in a different range of motion than that external rotation we were just doing, but same theory applies. Is the sacrum feeling balanced? Are you feeling like there's a sense of evenness? Okay. Breathing deeply in. And as you exhale, come underneath. So we're moving our hip from flexion into extension, and all the while keeping our SI joints nice and stable. Balancing your pelvis. Exhale to come under. Inhale to come out. Exhale to come under. And inhale to come long. Place that hand, knee down onto the ground, maybe rock so that you start to feel the weight bearing between the two sides balance themselves out. And then before lifting the other leg, notice neutral. Notice the pelvis. Breathing. Okay, and we'll switch sides. Left leg, right arm. Can you feel a broad swath across the back of your pelvis? Even as your leg goes into extension in the air, can you stabilize with your core, and does your pelvis feel even? Deep breath in, exhale underneath. Inhale, bringing it out. Exhale, bringing it in. As you move, can you notice that moment by moment stabilization that's happening? Place that knee down onto the ground, and let's find our way onto our back. Now, we're going to do reverse pigeon, but if you want to try this in pigeon pose, just so you can sense, you can do this in pigeon pose too, so really just choose. If you're going to come into pigeon pose, so let's, just like I was saying in the beginning, we'll take our right foot forward first. We want to notice that our hip is very flexed. Our knee is probably out to the side a little bit, which creates a little more rotation, okay, and abduction. Okay, so we're flexing, abducting, and rotating the hip all at one time. That's a lot. It's not a singular transaction. Okay, so whether you're on your back or whether you're on your front, Notice that could be like prying the can opener, that whatever your hip joint can't give you, your SI joint's going to have to take the brunt of. So make sure, whether you're on your back or on your front, that you have enough support where your SI joint doesn't feel like it's under duress. Okay, so you do you. And remember, you don't have to go to your deepest place. Maybe your foot is on the ground and you're on your back. Maybe your foot is up on a block. So that, or maybe your foot's on a wall. There's grades of this pose where you can really sense slowly through your range of motion what your SI joints are doing. So reverse or regular, you choose your place. And a lot of times we immediately come into this pose, pick up our head, we grab onto our shin or a cat or our thigh, and we're like, okay, I got it. And then you try to figure out how to be there. So instead, let's be there and slowly guide our way into the depth of the pose. So we're not, taking the extreme and then trying to figure out how to balance ourselves within it. So notice your breath. Pay attention, no matter what variation you're doing and how deep you're going. How is your sacrum feeling? Is your hip hiking up toward your shoulder or down? Is both sides of your pelvis feeling even weighted? What is your SI joints on both sides of the joint feel? What does that feel like to you right now? What are you noticing? How are you breathing? Maybe you can change the angle of your knee. Maybe you can draw your knee, your right knee, a little closer toward the midline. Maybe slide that ankle a little further so that your left your left thigh is supporting a little above your ankle joint. Experiment with all different ways to get to a place where you feel like your muscles are opening and your joints are stable, that the brunt of this pose is not on the joints, but on opening musculature. How are your sit bones? Those wide, those bones that you sit on, the ischiotuberaces, can you widen them? How's your low back curve? Is it intact or has it gone away? How is your breath? All right, and then we'll relax that. In between, maybe rub your cicada wings. And just kind of sense that internal rotation and adduction. Adduction is when you bring the legs toward the midline, internally rotating as well. Isn't it amazing how many varied movements we can do with our hips? Thank goodness. We're so mobile. We get to go from point A to point B our whole life. What a blessing. So let's take care of our joints that help us do this. All right, so let's switch sides. Left foot on right knee. Maybe you're sliding so it's more above your ankle that's resting on your right thigh. Maybe your right foot stays on the ground. Maybe you lift the right foot and put it up on a block or on a wall. Maybe you lift and grab on behind your thigh or your shin. Maybe you're in pigeon pose. Okay, so just try to explore what the pose blossoms into instead of taking the fullness and then trying to color in the lines. Notice if there's any maneuverability in your pelvis. Are you compensating by shifting the hips in any way? One hip higher toward your shoulder, one hip higher toward the sky. What are your sit bones doing? Can they broaden? What is your breath doing? Sense into the curves of your low back. Are they neutral? And then, of course, sense into the feeling state of the SI joints. We've done a lot of work to kind of bring awareness into this part of your body. It's just, what are you noticing? There's no rights or wrongs. Just pay attention to what is. How does this hip joint, SI joint, feel compared to the other side? It's very normal for us to have asymmetry. We all have patterns, so pay attention to your patterns. They teach you a lot. And then we'll relax that. And again, feet on the ground, cicada your wings, just slide one knee onto the inner shin of the other leg as you just gently windshield wiper your knees back and forth. Nice and gentle, nothing extreme. How's your breath? And then ask, is there anything else you need? If you just inquired and let the body be the guide, what movement is necessary for release? Is it extension of the pelvis? Is it flexion? Is it a wiggle? Is it nothing at all? Do you need to have your knees bent for Shavasana or straight? Just follow what the body's needs are. As you settle into your Shavasana, just notice the sense of ease across your body, feel your weight. Maybe there's a heightened sensation awareness around your pelvis. Notice how the breath and the pelvis move together. Feel the weight of your thighs. Let's begin to deepen our breathing. Don't move yet, just melt. And then maybe wiggle your fingers and your toes, roll your wrists and your ankles. Just enjoy some movement. Eventually, bring yourself onto your side. Have a moment to breathe. And then bring yourself upright to a comfortable seat. Again, noticing your posture. Relax through your hips, let your knees fall. And breathe. Let's offer our light outward. Share your energy. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.